Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about your security profiles and what you want to accomplish when you've got, let's say, 3 to 5 people, 3 to 5, let's say, able-bodied adults trying to secure a rural property. Farm, 200 acres, 300 acres, something like that. Generally speaking, you want to be able to control that road access. You want to be able to have some level of removal between the road and the places where you sleep, okay, because you need to buy time. If a security is breached, if you're not aware that security is being breached until somebody's actually at the door to the room you're sleeping in, you've got a problem. Your chances of surviving that are pretty low, but of course if you sleep with a gun by your side and you're relatively fast about dealing with that kind of situation, you would at least be able to make somebody pay the price for breaching your security. The other thing is, depending on the threat profile or what's going on, if there is any breaching or tampering with security, you have to take that as a hostile act. It's either a pre-operational, like testing your situation, or they've started it. And maybe they backed off for their own reasons. Maybe they had a vehicle problem. Maybe they got scared or something happened on their end that caused them to back off. The thing is, if they've already moved up to the point of breaching security at some point or tampering with security, you have to figure, okay, they might come back. You're going to have to raise your profile. Some of this is kind of interesting. I picked up a business card from a guy named Todd Savage a few years ago. In fact, it might have been about a year and a half ago at a Survival Expo here in Portland, Oregon. The guy was tied in with John Wesley Rawls and some of the American Redoubt Project. Now, some of the more competent people publish a lot of personal information, others don't. A lot of guys who have it for free out there on the internet, maybe it's worth what you pay for it. Maybe it's not. We don't know. But some of this stuff that does make a lot of sense, especially if your time is worth more than the money that some of these people will charge for services, well, then it becomes worthwhile. Especially when it comes to relocation, strategic relocation, that sort of a thing, with regards to finding suitable properties where somebody can discreetly go check that place out and see if it's suitable for your purposes. I have used services similar to that with varying levels of success, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was still dealing with somebody who was kind of a bit of a salesperson, and so of course they wanted to lipstick the pig as best they could to get me to jump in on a deal and buy the property. That's because in a lot of these situations I've been a guy who's bringing a lot to the table. People will want what me or my people are bringing to the table, and then of course may not really want us, or they feel there's baggage that they don't want. There's some other situations which a consultant may or may not be in a good position to address, or may not be in a desirable position to address. So, kind of understand where their head's at, your head's at, that sort of a thing, and figure out if, maybe it's worthwhile to hire somebody to do this. And remember those 3 things that we discussed: protecting from harm, liability, embarrassment. But then when we're looking at survival properties, there's a lot of other issues. Is there sufficient water? Is there sufficient food, at least production capability for the number of people you want? Would it be cost effective? A lot of these guys are after the millionaire crowd because they're the people who can afford these high-end permaculture systems. If you have a low-end group or a low-end group of people, low-end situation, it may or may not work. But you can get the books and the videos and some of the, you can study up on this stuff and get an idea. But it would help to get some outside opinions, because some of the times these are going to be the people you're going to coordinate with anyway. And if they judge you as somebody they don't want to do business with or deal with, and let's say in a retreat consulting situation, well, then you might have a problem with them or the people that they judge as cool later on. So there's still reasons you want to kind of touch base with some people, kind of go over a few things, and you may or may not want to disclose everything or discuss everything, but it's a good idea to touch base and kind of network a little bit, because there are going to be people out there who are fishing for information for nefarious purposes. But when you're trying to have a force multiplier type of application to a small number of people trying to secure a larger area, you want early warning. You want to know what's on the property, what you're dealing with. Now, I discussed a situation with high-end households. Everybody's got a camera. Everybody's keeping a lookout. We're saying, hey, who's the guy in a gray car? Who's the guy in a green truck? Do we know who he is? What buildings would he normally be going to? We're not trying to treat everybody as a threat because we don't want to offend people and make enemies. And that's one of the mistakes when we talk about the embarrassment or a reduction of reputation with a lot of people, is we don't want to be pissing people off. We don't want to be making enemies. We don't want to be trading threats with people, have something that's dealt with a threat and a dare. We don't want that with people. What I found out there in, some of these types of things, some people are more capable of dealing with that than others. A lot of the former military people, especially, I hate to say it, the more elite they are, the higher ranking they get, the more readily they're going to insert death threats in regular day-to-day conversation, like it's cool, like this, to do these things. Certain law enforcement people do, especially your SWAT types. A lot of these guys will insert death threats in day-to-day conversation. What's holding them back from carrying that stuff out? Well, the threads that hold society together. It probably isn't their own internal sense of right and wrong that really holds them back. It's just probably not. So when we look at, you could hire consultants. You're going to get some information. You try to make it a two-way street, but realize you're paying this guy to tell you the truth. So that tends to be where they're going to want to go on this. When you look at early warning systems, you want the lookouts, you want the networks, you want people to know that they can talk to you, okay? You want a phone number and a radio frequency out there so that people can contact you. So they can say, hey, listen, there's such and such vehicle, they've been hanging out for a while. Not everybody is going to want to contact you about that, but even that's information. Okay, if you know something's going on, if you know that a certain neighbor has your phone number, has a radio frequencies, you may have even given them a two-way radio, and you don't hear from them for 2 years, either they're going to aid and abet something that went wrong, or they're at least going to be no help. So we've gained more intelligence on where their head's at, or maybe they're just incompetent, maybe they're lame. But we're going to gain information on that. We need to be open to that outside dialogue so that we can make use of the extra eyes and ears which are generally going to be available in the neighborhood. Because a lot of other people are going to be getting their heads screwed on straight when they realize, hey, we're going to have to depend on each other. We're going to have to be on our own. Utilize any early warning system you can get a hold of. One that's electronic that's kind of interesting and it's been recommended by Southern Prepper 1 has been this. The Dakota Alert Mirrors Driveway Alert System. This is a motion detector type system that has like a 1 or 2 mile range. You can hide this. They even come with a little birdhouse hiding, or you can make or improvise something. And you can run multiples. You can say zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and you can put a little recording in there for what that thing's going to say over the radio if something goes by one of the sensors. If you establish a point of contact like that can functionally become a talk, this is kind of like a command center thing, a small localized command center. Just be a room in a clinic. You can be the corner of your kitchen when people are home all the time. Old folks can run one of these things. It's not that hard. You simply need to be available to answer everybody. You have a logbook of some sort. You write everything down. You're creating an evidence trail if something happened. Creating a forensic trail. And we could say, yes, at 3:15 p.m. the thing said that there was a vehicle went by this road or that road. These types of things can help you track the traffic. Now, without violating other people's privacy, you can kind of work it out with people. But if you have any sort of a gate or barrier on the property, that's a very important thing. What I've done here, this is a Yahoo search for steel farm gates. Okay, steel farm gates are a big deal out in the country. A lot of it has to do with, it's not just a cognitive issue on where a property line is, it's also a legal issue. You know, we talk about the guys who just want to go to IEDs and sniper rifles for enhancing property security. I can tell you that a lot of high-end rich people aren't going to do that because there's too much liability involved. And again, order usually, almost always, returns at some level. The thing about fences and gates is, you know, they're going to have various levels of strength, various levels of difficulty in breaching or something. It does allow you to detect a breach, okay? And that can be as important as stopping somebody from breaching. A lot of times we're just looking to detect a breach. In the Border Patrol 30 years ago, you know, there wasn't much for fences along the U.S.-Mexico border, but we'd still drag the fences with this kind of apparatus made out of a bunch of tires chained together so that they could just tell if there was footprints in the desert between the time we're dragging it and the time it got dragged before. And that was all they could tell. That was really all they could do with funding and all that, is kind of get an idea, okay, somebody's using this route or that route, detecting a breach. If you can afford to put up fences, don't forget that, especially with barbed wire fences, things like that, as a combat engineer, we learned a lot of different ways to do fences. You can improve them over time. But the gate is kind of a big deal. You got to have a gate of some sort, okay? Even if it's kind of improvised, you want a gate and a guardhouse of some sort. Even if they remain unmanned, if somebody breaches that, if somebody finds some way of forcing it, then you know ahead of time there was hostile intent. Even if it's a chain across the road between a couple of posts, it reduces somebody's ability to get vehicles through there. It slows down a breach. One of the major benefits of that is that it prevents covert entry. Covert entry is where somebody's coming in. They're doing pre-operational surveillance. They're doing some sort of a, they're saying they're there for one reason, and they're really there for maybe a bad reason. Okay, they're there for some predatory purpose. If they breach a gate, it's no longer covert. It might be clandestine. They may try to sneak their way through breaching a gate, but they're no longer covert. If they breach a barrier, that is a hostile act. That's one of the reasons we would still put locks up that maybe somebody could break through. If a barrier was breached, then it's also, it elevates things from, let's say, trespass to criminal trespass, or breaking and entering, things like that. So, you know, you got to think fences and gates. You want to think guard shacks, even if they're unoccupied. You want to think about some of these early warning alert systems. You want to think about maybe having some tactical consultants, somebody else with a trained mind on how an attack might work, how something like that might happen, who could go through and explain, maybe there's a few ways we could shore up defenses. Maybe we need to close off a different road. Maybe we need to route traffic so that it doesn't all go behind your barn. It has to go. Somebody has to go in front of your house to get into the rest of the property. So we may close off one road, open up another, so that everybody's kind of going to go by an area where you're going to see it. You might have had a previous property owner who, they didn't want the trucks and tractors going in front of the house, so they had the road set up so that they go through a blind spot to get to the rest of the property. Those are all things that you want to engineer into it. As far as putting in hardened defenses, you may want to. Southern Prepper 1's posted some videos lately that he's putting fighting positions in along his fence line. They remain empty most of the time. They can be used as storage or something like that. One of the positives for putting those fighting positions in is that you get a lot of extra time for the foliage to grow over them naturally. And once that's gone through a couple of seasons of growing over them naturally, there's no camouflage that's going to be as good as something that has been able to grow in naturally for a couple of years. And you can always build more fighting positions than you plan on using. Therefore, if somebody's doing a hostile reconnaissance, they know kind of where they are. They're still gambling on which ones to target. They're still gambling on maybe they got to use a larger, harder hitting weapon to target multiple fighting positions just to get one guy who may or may not be using one of them at any given time. We used to call that the MX missile defense. There would be one major MX missile for every 5 silos. If the Soviets wanted to take out the system, they had to be able to take out 5 hardened silos to guarantee taking out 1 missile. You can do the same thing with extra fighting positions. The other thing is, of course, if you do put in the bunkhouse, if you have, like, let's say, the ability to convert a barn loft into a bunkhouse or something like that, you're going to take in some of those other guys who, yeah, all they have is an SKS and an Alice pack, is 3 or 4 guys to a pickup truck. It means that you could be able to host an extra security force during a high threat time period. It means that you'd be able to host a security force that doubles as a workforce, especially when you might have the ability to fill every single one of those foxholes or bunkers that's been pre-dug. The other thing is, it might scare the living crap out of potentially hostile people who are doing a pre-operational recon. They are doing a recon. They find that there's dug-in fighting positions, and they don't want to mess with that. Okay, you got to realize that criminal elements, predatory government elements who are accustomed to preying on the citizens in a police state, they're used to hitting soft targets. They want to hit soft targets. They want to hit targets where there's a very high ratio of reward to effort. These people are criminals at the instinct. And if they start seeing foxholes all over the place, they don't want to gamble. Okay, they want to go in and have a guaranteed win. If you create a situation for them where it's a gamble and all they're going to get is a couple of trucks in your garden, they're probably not going to want to mess with it. If you're able to host more people and you've got larger numbers of people who would resist, then that increases your chances of survival, unless you maybe, there's a problem with the personalities. They start to get in, they start to take over, they start to vote you out. It becomes much more difficult to background check or see who or what you're dealing with in a situation if the internet is down. It becomes much more difficult to check your neighbors out if the internet is down and you can't kind of run through some of these things. That's part of what these retreat consulting guys will do, especially with regards to rural con artists who are selling properties or trying to get rid of because there's some sort of a problem. There might be problem neighbors. There might be problems with liens and other things on those. And some of these consultants, they're good for ferreting that type of information out. Hopefully this video has been helpful. I can add to the series. If you want a question or comment, please go ahead. Thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever you want to do. If you do comment with a question, please enable replies. It's very difficult for me to reply if you don't enable replies on your comments.